I had a weird realization today. I realized if I went back in time and asked comics and people who the greatest comedians of all time were about 10 or 15 years ago, and I asked people today, that list would be the exact same people. Isn't that strange? Like, why are there no additions to the greatest comics list? Why is it the Mount Rushmore of comedy is unchanged? The Hall of Fame remains exactly the same as it did. Louis C.K., Bill Burr, Patrice O'Neal, Norm Macdonald, whoever, the list is the same. It's very odd, don't you think? There's more stand-up comics than there's ever been. There's more comedy than there's ever been. And I would say there's more great comics than there's ever been, but there's no more of the greatest comics. The internet's essentially a comedy generating machine, and it hasn't pumped out anything I would consider greater than that. Because I looked as an example when Chewed Up by Louis C.K. came out. It was like 2008, and he was about 40 years old. So it's not that people aren't like old enough to be releasing some of that stuff. And Chappelle was much younger when he released some of the work that's considered the greatest. Eddie Murphy was like 19 or 20, I think, when he recorded Raw. So I don't know if age is an excuse. So what is it? Why is it that comics have plateaued? I would say a lot of people were on that trajectory and either haven't lived up to it or fell off. Because people I'd consider as being like potentials for that list, like, you know, when Tom Segura's special Completely Normal came out, I thought it was incredible. I thought he was headed to be one of the greatest ever. To not be biased, when I talk to people, no one is really naming Tom Segura as one of the greatest comics of all time, as much as they love him. Is it quantity over quality? Is the demands of the new media landscape and social media just too much for people to keep up with, so you can't produce the same level of work? To me, that seems like a bad excuse, because what comics were doing back then, instead of doing podcasts, they were doing morning radio, and they had to wake up at 5 a.m. to do it, instead of getting paid to do it from their apartment at their leisure. So I don't really know if that's a good excuse. And then people like going back to Louis C.K. were releasing great specials every year. George Carlin was releasing a great special every year. You know, they have some misses in there that aren't the best ever, but they've been putting out that level of content probably more so than even people produce now. And even more peculiar, the greatest comics are still the ones making the best stuff. Like, if it was some nostalgia, you would think what they produced back then would still be the best. But I would say Louis and Chappelle and people like that are still putting out the best stuff. I don't know if any newer comics have put out anything better than their newest stuff. If they were just considered, if Chappelle was just considered from his 3 newest specials, I'd still put him there. Maybe I'm a boomer, maybe I'm out of touch, but I like to talk to young people. I talk to young comics to see what they like, and it seems like they all still have that age of discovery. Like, everybody liked Pink Floyd when they were a teenager at some point, and everybody eventually discovers how good Patrice O'Neal or Norm Macdonald or whatever, how good they were. And it feels like even the younger kids, I don't think are holding up any of their like newer favorite people to the greats. And from my own like anecdotal perspective, I've been in the room with a lot of these comics performing, you know, and I've been in the audience and watched Bill Burr. I haven't seen anybody able to kill at that level. Just like in terms of visceral reaction, there's kind of a part of it, to use an overused word, that's undeniable. It's beyond opinion. It's just how much noise are people making? You know, are they convulsing from laughter and doubled over like I was at Bill Burr? And I've been around a lot of the people that people might consider adding to that list. I haven't seen anybody kill as hard as those guys do. Just trying to be unbiased, right? But maybe I'm a boomer, maybe I'm out of touch, maybe people are only considered great in retrospect. Maybe some of the stuff that's been produced now or is being produced 10 years from now will be considered the greatest. Maybe somebody like Bo Burnham is on that list that's for the younger generation, doing something different in a way that I just can't see, and it belongs on that list. Maybe. But the reason I don't know if that holds up necessarily is because, to go back to the example of like Louis was considered one of the greatest pretty immediately after those specials, and he kept adding to it every year. I don't think everybody needs a decade out. Or even in rap, somebody like Kendrick, it didn't take a decade for people to be like, oh yeah, Kendrick's one of the greatest. Right after Good Kid, Mad City, and then To Pimp a Butterfly, people are like, oh yeah. And the same thing is true with comedy, I think. So why is this? What's at fault? What's happening? I think it seems hard to come up with a theory that isn't related to the internet and social media. It's complex how it's related probably, but it seems to be something with people being able to perform for their own audience in a way that they couldn't before, at least as quickly. Because now people kind of fall into their niche really quickly. It used to be people could tour around as stand-up comics at comedy clubs and kind of grind their way out to an audience and get better and better, kind of from obscurity. Now that's not really a possibility, because clubs are really only booking people who have followings. If you're a club, why would you book somebody with no followers versus somebody with 200,000 followers when there's uncountable people who have 200,000 followers now? And so people are finding their own audiences quicker, which is good. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm glad people can put things out with less resistance. You just need a cell phone and the internet could be the judge of how good it is. But maybe there's something lost with that. Maybe gatekeepers in a world that was gatekept has some type of benefit for the quality, because with people able to perform to their own audiences very quickly and finding their niche, it kind of limits who you need to speak to. Because if you can kill in Williamsburg, Brooklyn with Trump bad jokes, they don't really have to work for Rifle, Colorado. But it makes them kind of like bland and not very good and just kind of like pandery. And the same is true where I live in Austin, Texas. There's a lot of people here who essentially just say slurs as punchlines. And on the same note, go try that in some of the more liberal parts of the country and you're going to be disappointed that your jokes aren't as good as they think they are. And it used to be, if you didn't have your own audience, you had to figure out how to make that joke work for everybody and make everybody laugh at that type of stuff. And that doesn't seem to happen anymore. I think the other part of social media that's complicated is stand-ups get better from the audience. It's like a songbird teaching their young to sing. It's feedback. And maybe people are just different in what they want now. Maybe they have less attention spans. Maybe the format they're used to consuming, because it's so tiny and so short, they can't process things on the same level as they used to be able to. I don't love that answer because I think people generally have great taste, and the people that everybody loves, the list of the greatest comics, if you ask the greatest comics, is the same as if you just ask somebody on the street. It's not that every popular person is considered the greatest. However, pretty much every person who is considered the greatest found popularity in some regard. Maybe not the degree they deserve, and they deserve more. So maybe it's something with what the audience wants and how they're influencing comics to get better or not. Maybe it's something with how we're presented media now, because it used to have to be that you selected your own media to a different degree. You know, you'd go to a record store and dig through the records and find one that appealed to you. Now, Spotify's just like, here's a playlist you like. And don't get me wrong, I do they're usually right. They do a good job with that algorithm. However, that limits what you're looking for. And the same is true with comedy. If you're just YouTube and TikTok and Instagram are deciding what you like for you, it's going to change who's great and what people are incentivized to create. Maybe there's some type of human limit to how good people could be at stand-up, which sounds weird to say about an art form, but it seems true with something like the 100-meter dash, because if you look at a graph of the 100-meter dash, people are getting progressively faster, and how fast they're getting better slows down and stops, to the point now where the 100-meter dash world record, I believe, is still held by Usain Bolt 15 years ago, and people haven't gotten close to that. So if people can slow down at the 100-meter dash, maybe people slow down how much better they're getting at stand-up. Maybe because people sense that limit, instead of building up and up, because you can only get so high on a certain foundation, maybe people started building out. Maybe instead of just pure stand-up, people have gotten better at different disciplines like crowd work. One argument I'm sympathetic to would be that people are better at crowd work than they've ever been. I think that'd be a pretty easy case to make. It's not like people like Patrice can't do crowd work, but Louis never really did that type of thing. The internet has greatly rewarded that and incentivizes being great at crowd work. So people have gotten so unbelievably good at it. So if we expand stand-up to that, maybe there are some people in the Hall of Fame now who wouldn't have been on that list. Maybe 10 years from now, we'll look back and be like, well, if we consider the best crowd work category, then we have some new people on that Mount Rushmore. What I personally hope from a less cynical angle is I hope stand-up is expanding to doing everything well. Because there's always been specialists. There's always going to be specialists that are, this guy's a storytelling guy, this guy's a one-liner guy, this guy's a crowd work guy. I think the best people and the most exciting stand-up are people who can do it all at once, seamlessly. Not like, this is my Q&A section, this is my story section. The best people are doing that all together, and you don't even realize that they're flowing between those things seamlessly, to the point where it makes their jokes feel like they're thinking of them on the spot, and it makes their riffing and crowd work feel like they prepared it in advance. It's so good. To me, that's the best stand-up. That's the best stand-up can be. And you see some people who are good at that, and I hope 10 years from now, the best are people like that. I think the greatest additions to the Mount Rushmore comedy are going to be people who can knock it all out of the park. And maybe people who are doing something new in a way that we haven't realized with stand-up. Maybe people with like music cues and a more over-the-top stage performance, maybe involving other people, where it's pushing the limits on what stand-up is even considered. Because as soon as people are asking the question, is that even stand-up anymore? That's exciting. That's when things get interesting. So I hope the best people in the future are going to be people who can do all that and something new in a way that I can't envision with my boomer mind. But what do you guys think? Am I forgetting anybody who belongs on that list from the last 10 or 15 years? If you're being like fair about who the greatest is, not who you just like right now, because obviously I love a lot of stand-up right now. Who have I missed that's a new addition to that list in the last 10 or 15 years?